Good morning, everyone. This is a story of 1 Samuel 28 and 1 Samuel 29. We are at a point where the power balance is about to shift over. For the last few chapters, David has been increasing and Saul has been decreasing in his power, and we are about to hear the final story of Saul's life. If we remember from our last set of stories, Samuel has died, and Israel mourned for him. I believe I mentioned that last chapter. We are now at a point where Samuel is gone, and Saul is kind of left to his own devices. He's kind of by himself at this point. David has fled to the land of Philistia, and he is working with the king, King Achish in Gath. And the two of them are working closely together. David has been doing different smaller raiding campaigns. He has been telling the king at this time that he was going to different Israelite towns, but in reality, he's been invading other larger cities and villages and stuff like that that are not Israelite or Hebrew. And been saying to the king, I've been attacking my own towns, but he hasn't been. So David's been kind of lying and being deceptive about what he's been doing. But the idea is David's trying to gain loyalty from the king. And that's going to sort of come to a head in this next chapter. But where we find ourselves is that Samuel has just recently died, and Israel has mourned, and Saul is kind of by himself. Now, what we hear is the Philistines have gathered up a pretty significant force, and they've marched to Shunem. To give you a sense of where this is right now, you can see Lake Galilee is in the north part. Directly south of this is kind of where you would find like Jerusalem and stuff like that. So imagine this northern part is kind of where in modern times, in Jesus' time that is, Jesus would be from Lake Galilee or like the northern part of this. And then directly south of this would be where Jerusalem is found. So they march to Shunem, and Israel sort of puts together a force to sort of compete with this. So Saul and his men gather together, and they arrive there as well, except Saul's extremely nervous. He understands that for this last while, things have not been going well for him, and he is trying to get an answer from God as to how well this battle will go for him. Now, Saul, there's sort of three methods that the kings of this time would divine an answer or get an answer from God. And the three methods were either through dreams, through the use of the Urim, I don't know how to pronounce that word, Urim, or through the prophets. Now, Saul does not have the opportunity, or he has not heard of any dreams. He hasn't had any dreams happen to him, whether he will be victorious in this battle or not. He's also not heard from prophets, and Saul has the current ephod of the high priest. So the high priest would wear this priestly garment that almost looked like a breastplate, except on it had all these different jewels, and it was made of gold, and it was very, very meticulously, specially made for the high priest. Now Saul has that in his possession, except he doesn't have the high priest. The high priest is Abiathar, or however you pronounce that, who was actually with David at this time. Remember, Saul had Doeg the Edomite kill all of the priests because they had allowed David to take some of the bread from the temple and had assisted David in his escape from Saul. And so Saul had Doeg the Edomite kill everyone except for Abiathar. And so now David has the high priest with him, and it sounds as though Saul has set up his own high priest, this man by the name of Zadok. Later on, when David is established as a king, we hear about two high priests, so this kind of gives us a sense that Saul likely set up another high priest after the other priests have all been killed. And this high priest would likely be wearing the ephod of the high priest, which is that large sort of breastplate. And with that, there's these two stones called the Urim and Thummim. Or Urim and Thummim. Now, the significance of these two stones is one was black and one was white. It had writing on both sides, and it was essentially a way that God would the priest would essentially ask questions to God, and then would somehow cast the stones, and the stones would make it obvious what God thought was going to happen, or what God said was going to happen or not. It's just we don't really have a modern day context of it, but it was a way that that the priests would understand what God wanted from them. But right now, Saul doesn't have that in his possession. He also didn't receive a dream. He also did not have any prophets nearby that would indicate to him what he should do. So, Saul, along with his men, this is him talking to Zadok, trying to figure out exactly what's expected. And the person doesn't know. He's not sure exactly what God wants. So, Saul, in confrontation with, or in consultation with his servants and his men around him, figured out that maybe their best opportunity to figure out what God wants from them is to go to a medium. A medium is kind of like a sorcerer or a witch or that sort of idea. It's someone that dabbles with dark arts and with spirits and stuff like that. And during the reign of Saul, he had actually cast all of them out of Israel. It's unsurprising that he did that, in the sense that he had Samuel that was sort of with him and beside him and giving him a lot of advice constantly. But Saul sort of is in a point of complete desperation. He doesn't know exactly what he should do. So after some time of reflecting, he says, all right, I'm going to do that. So him, along with two other men, sort of get changed. They sort of cover themselves and make it so that it's not obvious that they are kings or important people. And they head to this medium in the town of Endor. So not very far away from Shunem. When they arrive there, they make pleasantries and they ask her, are you the woman we're looking for? Are you the medium? And the woman is very hesitant to say yes. At this time, it's illegal to be a medium, to be someone that interacts with spirits or diviner. And so she is very, very hesitant to say yes, but eventually they convince her to. Now we hear from this that Saul is able to convince her that I will help you. And then she asks, okay, well, who would you like to speak with? And Saul decides that the best person that he could speak with, that he could essentially speak from the dead, would be Samuel. Now, this next part of the story is kind of unusual, even for the Bible. And there's lots of interesting things that are happening here. We're going to go off the assumption, though, that as the Bible writes it, that's exactly accurate to what happened. There's some people that think maybe it was Saul having a hallucination, or that it was evil spirits working, or whatever. We're just going to go off the assumption that this was actually Samuel. Somehow God provided the opportunity for Samuel to speak to Saul even when he was dead. So after in conversation, the woman says, okay, well, I guess I will take this. Before that shows, she realizes that this is actually the king. And she describes an old man coming up to speak with Saul. And when Saul begins to speak with him, Samuel says, why are you disturbing me? Why are you bringing me up from here? Do you not know that this is exactly as the Lord has, or as I've told you what happened? We've warned you of this. You have done many bad things, and God will take the kingship out of your hand. In fact, by this time tomorrow, you will also be dead, as will all of your sons. And he is given a very doom and gloom sort of picture of what will be happening in the next few hours as he goes to battle against the Philistines. Your kingship will be passed on to David. You will die along with your children, and this is all because of what you did not do with the Amalekites or the other times that you disobeyed God. And Saul is filled with fear and did exactly what he he sort of acted in his best interest and what he thought would be what a king does. And we get the sense of this earthly and heavenly king again, the idea that Saul is just sort of acting just sort of on the cuff, in the moment, trying to do what's best, but not always for himself, or not always for his kingdom, but for himself. And in the same sense, Saul is going to a medium and already rejecting God again, by not having an answer from him, so he tries to find his alternative methods. Saul falls down the ground, upset and unable to cope, and he has to be convinced that he should eat something before battle the next day. And that's sort of where the story leaves off. Now we're going to quickly jump over to the next chapter to give you a sense of what's happening with David, because the two stories are happening at the same time. The Philistines have marched up to Shunem. Let me go back to that. The Philistines have marched back up to Shunem, and it is a large army of Philistines. And David was originally with these men. So what happened at this time was David was asked by Achish to go up along with him to act as his bodyguard, actually, because David has become a very well-known, excellent soldier, and the king understands that he would be someone who would be extremely useful. And so Achish brings up David and his men with him. But the other Philistines that are a part of this army are very hesitant to have David, a Hebrew man, in the backs of their lines, because what they expect to have happen is the battle starts and they're attacking the Hebrews on the one side, and then David and his 400 men or 500 men, or typically we talk about 400 men, would turn on the kings on the back lines, and then they would be sort of getting swamped by two sets of Hebrew armies. So the other Philistines don't trust him, and they're like, "This is the man we've heard of. This is the man that their songs are. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. We don't want him in our army. Send him home." So King Achish sends David back to Ziklag, and that's kind of where the story leaves off. So right now, tomorrow we're going to talk about what happens in the battle and what David does during this time, because David is not participating in this battle, and the Israelite army is about to be routed. And completely decimated and destroyed, as God has said, or as Samuel has said, through the medium of Endor. And this is kind of where the story leads off. It's sort of the foretelling, the prophecy is sort of coming to pass right now, and we're seeing this transition of power in a very, very violent, grotesque way. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you later.